the other thing which has caused several problems to people I know has been the issue of fair use in repurposing compositions, etc., for creating new IP from existing IP and using bits of it. On the first, I really do think it's a pressing issue that at the moment we're unable to copy data from one medium to another. I personally, whenever we release anything, put a message on it waiving the right to it, because I think ultimately it makes no sense for a law to exist that is so widely disobeyed and so people are so widely ignorant of that the law in itself. When people, to be perfectly clear, I think you have the figures you said in an article, something like 85% of people, if asked, do you know it's illegal to copy data from a CD to your computer, would say that they had no idea it was illegal, and then when asked if it should be illegal, they would immediately say, of course it shouldn't. And the fact that a law exists of that kind, that everyone it's put to sort of automatically, intrinsically feels, and certainly everyone who has an understanding of the way that computers operate in their lives instinctively feels, makes no sense to them. I don't see how that is in any way promoting the idea of law being something that people should respect. If the law is transparently and obviously to everyone inapplicable to their daily lives and their daily experience of digital economy and computers, etc., then it's something that they can't follow, and then I don't see why they would then go on to respect any law put in place to govern the way that people handle the digital economy anyway. It's almost counterproductive, and I really, as a result, can't understand why anyone in the music industry would be in favour of that law continuing. In the simple basis that even if I were to accept their positions on the way that file sharing, etc., should be handled, it surely weakens the case if for those companies, if the law that exists is something that people routinely, habitually, and instinctively disobey. It doesn't make any sense. So I'm fully with Consumer Focus on that point. The other thing that I'd like to talk briefly about is the repurposing of intellectual property in new ways for the creation of new intellectual property. And I think the best example I could think of, and I don't know how often, does this go in hand some things that are said here? No, that's probably for the best, because I'm about to say the words unstoppable sex machine. I'm sure that's been said in this house before, but not necessarily in an official context. There's a band called Carter the Unstoppable Sex Machine who wrote and recorded a rather brilliant song about child abuse in the 90s, which included as part of its chorus the line "Goodbye Ruby Tuesday." Now, as I'm sure most people know, that's a direct quote from a Rolling Stones song. It was also a musical quotation, and they used the music itself. Now, they were sued for that by the Rolling Stones. It was judged against them, and all credit went to the Rolling Stones. Now, this in itself, I think, is a place where copyright law is distinctly out of step with what it takes for people to communicate effectively and to create a cultural product. I think when you address people as a whole, and when you create something that's artistic, you're essentially trying to convey a meaning. And the attempt to convey meaning requires a common language and a common understanding. And I think certainly in the digital era, and when people are used to, they operate on a kind of on a level where their common cultural heritage is something, it's the currency of their language and communication. And if I refer to Goodbye Ruby Tuesday by the Rolling Stones, I'm not saying that I'm not taking their work and putting it out as my own, I'm not copying them. What I'm doing is I'm referencing in the same way that Milton referenced the Bible. I'm referring to our common cultural heritage in order to make a point and to make a statement to convey meaning that's substantially different from the original.
We're strong supporters of some form of fair use exemption in UK copyright law for one very simple sort of overarching reason. We think that the fact of how the internet is used in this day and age is that there is copyright infringement and there's copyright infringement, and they can be two very, very different things. We do not support piracy. We do not support the sort of rampant downloading, torrenting, whatever it may be, of artists' works for free to get around having to pay for it. And we fully appreciate why owners of content are concerned about it. That said, there is a lot of what we call casual, inadvertent, one-off sort of infringement that just occurs as part of how people use the internet. Be it sort of somebody putting a little clever mashup that suddenly becomes viral, sending links to friends, doing things, in fact, that in the old economy were also copyright infringement, but nobody cared about it. I like to point out that my grandmother, when she was alive, used to enjoy clipping newspaper articles, sending them to my grandfather's office, having 10 copies photographed or photocopied and circulated around. And my grandmother was a copyright infringer. Nobody really cared about those sorts of things then. There's been a tendency to blur the line between that sort of behavior in the digital world and online and true piracy. And when that line gets blurred, it does a tremendous amount of damage to digital innovation. It does damage to the startups who potentially stand liable and can't possibly, afford to fight a legal battle. It does damage to the users who the startups are relying on, who our constituents are relying on to promote and use and talk about their service if they find themselves at the end of a copyright infringement suit. Fair use is a step in the right direction toward creating a sort of residual and broad exemption for the relatively harmless behavior that we think is an important part of how the internet is used. It's not everything, and as I say, I don't want to sort of go into the details of what aspects of, say, the American fair use exemption help and what don't. But as a broad point, it is very, very much a step in the right direction.
I spent three hours today with Lady Wilcox and the major collection societies discussing the issues to do with the Hargreaves report and so forth. And all of them agreed that the intellectual property needs to be protected. And most did not think that fair use was actually the correct way forward. Education about intellectual property was far more important. But there does need to be an industry change as well. We've talked about format shifting. Now, quite clearly that should be allowed. Once you've bought a license for a product, be it a CD or whatever, if you then choose to listen to it on an MP3, I don't see why that should be changed. I have had recent discussions with the BPI, and I know that they've changed their view on this, and this is something they're now going to be supporting, which I fully endorse. But with the MPLC, for example, we went to the film studios and said to them, you will never get the coach operators to tell you which films they're using and pay you a license for each film. Change your business model. Which they did. They decided that each coach would be charged whatever, £100 a year, and could show whatever films they liked, and the model for distribution of that money would be different to a per film basis. It would be based on, in this case, a DVD retail sales. So the industry needs to change along with the digital economy, and it needs to change the models. But I have to say that fair use is not free use. We have something in this country called fair dealing, which is far more appropriate and more narrowly defined. Fair use, I will say that the American model is very loosely defined. The courts have been defining it much more narrowly when you take it to court, but it's been costing things like $1 million to get the definitions reduced. I think it's much better to have a narrow definition that we can all accept. And the fair use in America, there's really 4 principles to it, and 3 of those I actually disagree with. And only one of those I can actually say I do agree with, and that would be time shifting and format shifting, because you've bought the license already. As opposed to, one of the examples is that if it doesn't affect you commercially, you shouldn't have a say in how your copyright should be utilised. And that would be a defence for having fair use. I profoundly disagree. I believe that if a musician creates a work of copyright, then they should have the say in how their product is used. Now, if Simon wants to give it away and put it on his CD that he can copy freely, absolutely fine with that, as often people do. But I do think it's we're going down the wrong route if we decide to let people have open use of anyone's on a technicality, be it for critique or parody or non-commercial use.